Hello and welcome to Use Training Packages and Accredited Courses to Meet Client Needs. This is one of the units from the Certificate 4 in Training and Assessment. In this little movie, I'm going to take you first through the learning program, including the assessment tasks that need to be completed. Then we're just going to focus on training packages, particularly the endorsement process, and then the endorsed components, the qualification framework, the assessment guidelines, and the units of competency themselves. It's probably a good idea to have a copy of the learning program handy. If you've been in class, you will have a hard copy. If not, I will have emailed one to you. The learning program takes you through the requirements for this unit, the key topics that we will cover, and the assessment tasks that you will need to complete. This unit is about being able to use training packages and accredited courses to meet the needs of individuals, organisations, and even groups within organisations. You will learn about the curriculum that's used in the vet sector, the training packages themselves, which are nationally developed and endorsed, and accredited courses which are developed and endorsed at a state level. You're also going to learn about some other key elements of the national vet system, including our quality assurance system and some of the key bodies that we deal with. Once you have developed an understanding of training packages and accredited courses and the quality framework that guides how we use them, you'll be able to match an individual or a group's learning needs to either a unit of competency, perhaps a group of units often referred to as a skill set, or even a qualification or accredited course. If you have your learning program beside you, you'll be able to see the assessment tasks that you need to complete. You will receive detailed information about each of those assessments, and we are certainly there to support you, so we encourage you to make contact with us if you need any assistance. Okay, so let's go back to the agenda for this movie. We've talked briefly about the content of the learning program, which outlines what the unit is about, and we've also talked very briefly about those assessment tasks. I will remind you that it's important to get those assessment tasks completed and submitted by the due date. If you're having any problem with the due date, you need to negotiate an extension with us. Usually we are very understanding. However, we do have some constraints on us from the state government about the length of time that people take to complete a unit. So it is important that you communicate with us about any difficulties that you might be having. Okay, so we're going to move on now and talk about training packages. What are they? Where do they come from? How are they endorsed? And where do we access them? Okay, you might just like to open a Word document or grab a piece of paper and just do a little brainstorm. See if you can write down anything that you know about training packages. For example, do you already know where they come from? Do you know where you would find a training package? Do you know how to access information in a training package? See how you go. I do hope you've taken some time to jot down what you already know about training packages before I give you some more information. Training packages are made up from nationally endorsed competency standards. You might know them as units of competency or even just units or competencies. They're like the subjects. These units of competency are grouped together to then form qualifications. In the vet sector, each qualification typically aligns to a job role. For example, if you were to complete the Certificate 3 in beekeeping, that aligns to a role of being a beekeeper. If you do a Certificate 3 in customer contact, there are some possible job roles like customer contact agent, customer service representative, or a telesales representative. Training packages are developed by bodies called Industry Skills Councils. We usually use the acronym ISC, and you will come across this regularly as you work your way through this course. To gain national endorsement, the Industry Skills Councils must provide evidence of very broad stakeholder consultation. They need to ensure that the training package they either develop or review is relevant, current, and meets industry needs. Although training packages very clearly outline the standards to be achieved in the workplace via the units of competency, they don't prescribe how an individual should be trained. Teachers and trainers develop the how, and we usually take into account the learner's needs, their abilities, and their circumstances. This is just an example of one training package, SIS 10, which is the Sport, Fitness and Recreation Training Package. This training package represents that industry sector which is about sport, fitness and recreation. This is just a screen grab from training.gov.au. This is a national website where we find information about training packages. You can see just from this grab that there are many training packages out there that are currently in use. This is just another example of one of the training packages that are out there. We call it SIT07, SIT07, and it represents tourism, hospitality and events. This training package, ZWV05, is the humanitarian training package. So let's just backtrack for a minute and spend a little bit more time on industry skills councils. These industry skills councils have two key roles. The first one is that they actually need to be experts in their industry sector. They need to be able to tell us very clearly what's happening in that industry sector now, but also what's going to happen in the future. What are the trends? The second role that the Industry Skills Council have is what we've already talked about, and that is the review or the development of training packages themselves. Now, industry skills councils don't necessarily just look after one training package. Many of them look after lots of training packages. And you can see here that the Agri-Food Industry Skills Council looks after 8 to 10 different training packages. Now remember, each of those training packages represent an industry sector. This Industry Skills Council, the Community Services and Health Industry Skills Council, just looks after two training packages, the Community Services Training Package and the Health Training Package. Both of these training packages are enormous. This Industry Skills Council, Forest Works, looks after two training packages, Forest and Forest Products and Pulp and Paper Manufacturing. Government Skills Australia, also an Industry Skills Council, just looks after 5 training packages: Correctional Services, Local Government, Public Sector, Public Safety and the Water Industry Training Package. Here's another one, Skills DMC. That's the Industry Skills Council. It looks after 5 training packages that represent the coal industry, civil construction, drilling industry, extractive industry, and my all-time favourite, metalliferous mining. Service Skills Australia is another Industry Skills Council. And another example of an Industry Skills Council, the Transport and Logistics Industry Skills Council. It looks after the Aviation, Maritime and Transport and Logistics Training Package. There are other Industry Skills Councils, and I'd encourage you to do a Google on Industry Skills Councils and you'll be able to see them all there. Just before we move on, I'd really like you to have a go at accessing the website training.gov.au. As I mentioned before, this is where we find information about training packages. Once you've accessed that website, see if you can find a training package that represents the industry that you come from. Now, I will have sent you, and if I haven't, please give me a nudge, but I'm hoping I've sent you a document that just gives you some steps about accessing training.gov.au and how you use it to find information. Okay, hit the pause button and go and have a little play around on training.gov.au, see what you can find. Okay, having done that, you're back. So I want to talk to you now about the sorts of components that we will find in training packages, and they're loosely categorized into 2 groups: the endorsed components that are in fact endorsed by the NSSC, and we'll explain that shortly, and the non-endorsed support materials. Let's start with the non-endorsed components. These include learning strategies, assessment resources, and professional development materials. These are there to support us as we implement each training package. So now let's move on to the endorsed components, the qualification framework, the assessment guidelines, and the units of competency. It is critical that you have a really good understanding of those three endorsed components. Let's look at them again. The endorsed components of a training package are the qualifications framework, the assessment guidelines, and the competency standards. Now remember, we sometimes call the competency standards units, competencies, or units of competency. These three components are endorsed by the NSSC. You might like to write this down, the National Skills Standards Council. So after an industry skills council goes through that review process or development process with lots of consultation with stakeholders, they then give the final product, the qualifications framework, the assessment guidelines, and the units themselves to the National Skills Standards Council for endorsement. So the first bit that's endorsed by the NSSC are the qualifications framework. Now the critical bits within the qualifications framework are the packaging rules, the employability skills summary, and the AQF descriptors. So let's learn a little about each of those three dot points. We'll start with the qualifications framework and a little activity. Now I'd like you to go to training.gov.au to access the Certificate 2 in Business. The code for that qualification is BSB 20107. Now to access that, you need to go to the home page on training.gov.au, scroll down to the bottom, and on the right hand side there's a search function. If you type in BSB 20107 and hit return, you should come up with an option to download this qualification as either a Word document or a PDF. Once you've downloaded it, you can just start to search through that document. The first thing I'd like you to do is note the job roles that this qualification aligns to. Once you've done that, I'd like you to look for the heading Packaging Rules. The packaging rules outline very clearly the units that you need to complete to actually gain the Certificate 2 in Business. Now most packaging rules have core units. These are the units that you absolutely have to complete. You have no choice. If they're not called core units, they'll be called either required or compulsory units. It just depends on the training package. There will also be elective units, and there is usually a range of elective units, so that when you complete any qualification, there are core units that you must complete, and then a range of electives that you can choose from. In this qualification that we're looking at, BSB 20107, I'd like you to just identify how many core units there are and how many elective units there are, so that you will know the total units that need to be completed to meet this BSB 20107. We'll talk more about packaging rules in class. Still using the qualification Certificate 2 in Business, BSB 20107, I'd like you now to find the heading Employability Skills Summary. And I'd like you to note those 8 employability skills and the facets beside each skill that provide the detail against each of those skills that are relevant to this particular qualification and job role. This employability skills summary simply states that as well as meeting the requirements of the core units and the elective units, a learner needs to also achieve. Still using the Certificate 2 in Business, BSB 20107, I would like you to find the heading Employability Skills Summary and note the 8 employability skills and their facets which provide detail against each of these skills for this particular qualification and job role. To successfully meet the requirements of this qualification, you not only need to complete the appropriate core and elective units, but you need to be able to demonstrate that you have these skills outlined in this summary. For more information about employability skills, one website you could try is employabilityskills.training.com.au. Right, let's just check that you're still with me. We're talking about training packages. We know that training packages are developed and reviewed by industry skills councils and that they're endorsed by the National Skills Standards Council. The parts of the training package that are endorsed are the qualifications framework, the assessment guidelines, and the actual units themselves. At the moment, we're talking about the qualifications framework. We've talked about the packaging rules, we've looked at employability skills summary, and we need to just touch on the AQF, the Australian Qualification Framework. Okay, the best way for you to become familiar or start to get familiar with the AQF is to do a little activity. So I'd like you to do a Google search on AQF. You should come up with www.aqf.edu.au. Now I'd like you to download the Australian Qualifications Framework. You need to do this by clicking on View the AQF First Edition July here. That's what it actually says. It's on the right hand side of that screen, that first page. I'll say it again, View the AQF First Edition July here. Now once you've downloaded this document, you should be able to find the descriptors for each qualification level. You'll certainly see the breadth of the AQF. It goes from a Certificate 1 all the way through to a doctorate to a PhD. What I'd like you to do is just have a look at the descriptors for, say, a Certificate 2 and then a Certificate 4 or a diploma, and start to see the differences in terms of the intensity and the outcomes. I'd like you to find the AQF level that you think your job aligns to. So if you've got a current position, if you're in the workplace, can you tell me what, or you can decide what AQF level best describes your position? Okay, another task, guys, based around training.gov.au. What I'd like you to do is search for a training package that suits you, that fits your industry. Now, you probably did this a little bit earlier. If not, here's your opportunity to do that. Once you've found that training package, I'd like you to find a qualification within that training package that is of interest to you. Once you've found that qualification and downloaded it, what I'd like you to do again is find the job role that that qualification aligns to, have a look at the packaging rules for your qualification and the employability skills summary for your qualification. So the same sort of activity that we did around that Certificate 2 in business, however this time I want you to be looking at a qualification that is of interest to you. Okay, let's move on. We're looking at the endorsed components of a training package. We've looked at the qualification framework, in particular the packaging rules, the AQF descriptors and the employability skills summary. We're now going to look briefly at the assessment guidelines. The assessment guidelines provide information that underpins the way assessment should happen in your industry. The information we find in the assessment guidelines falls again into two categories. You'll find information that is replicated across all training packages. So there's information about assessment in the vet sector as a whole. But the second category of information is information about assessment in your particular industry sector. It could be information about the sorts of resources or equipment that you need to have before you can assess, or information about the sorts of qualifications and industry experience that you hold before you're able to assess in your industry. This task is quite a difficult one. I'd like you to try and access the assessment guidelines for your training package. And I'm just looking at the slide, seeing I didn't type the word package. So it reads access the assessment guidelines for your training. It means access the assessment guidelines for your training package. Sorry guys. Now to do this, you need to go back to training.gov.au and download your actual training package. So not the qualification, the actual training package that represents your industry sector. So go back to that other document that I sent through that has the screen grabs and the instructions on how to use training.gov.au. That could be quite useful. If you can access your assessment guidelines, I'd just like to see, I'd like you to go through the assessment guidelines, not in any great detail, but try finding the assessor competency requirements. So what requirements do you need to meet to be an assessor in that training package? And also see if you can find the information on how you actually design assessment tools. If you cannot download your assessment guidelines, please don't panic. Again, this is something that we will cover in class, and I'll certainly help you with that. Let's just take a breath. So we're looking at training packages in this movie. We've talked about the endorsement process, industry skills councils through broad stakeholder consultation, develop or review a training package. It then goes to the National Skills Standards Council, the NSSC, for endorsement. Now, the endorsed components are the qualification framework. We've talked about the packaging rules, the AQF descriptors, and the employability skills summary. They also endorse the assessment guidelines. We've had a go at trying to find the assessment guidelines. And now we're going to talk about the units of competency. One way of understanding a unit of competency is to consider the title of the unit as a work activity. If you think the qualification is equivalent to a job role, then a unit of competency is equivalent to a work activity. And in any job role, there are lots of work activities. So the job role is equivalent to the qualification. Think of the unit of competency as a work activity. So, remember the qualification that you found earlier, not the Certificate 2 in business, but the one that you were comfortable with. Go back to that and see if you can choose a unit of competency from that qualification. It could be a core unit or it could be an elective unit. And what I'd like you to do, you might even want to print out a copy, is use that unit as we go through the following slides. Looking at the unit, I want you to check out the title, and I'd like you to consider the title as the work activity, one of the work activities that would make up that job role. Now, down the left-hand side of the unit, you'll see the heading Elements. Think of the elements as the key tasks that make up that work activity. To the right of each element, you'll see a list of performance criteria. Again, consider the performance criteria as the detail or the standard that needs to be achieved in the workplace. So if you look at the title of your unit, think of it as the work activity. If you look at the elements down the left-hand side, think of those as the key tasks that make up that work activity. And the dot points or the numbers under the performance criteria, they provide the detail against each of those key tasks, the standard that needs to be achieved in the workplace. You can now go to the headings Required Skills and Required Knowledge. Now, under the heading Required Skills are a series of dot points. These dot points are simply the skills required to meet the performance criteria. The same with the required knowledge. The dot points simply describe the knowledge that is required to be able to meet the performance criteria. In your unit, you should also be able to find a heading Evidence Guide. Now, there are a couple of subheadings here that I'd like you to look at. Critical aspects for assessment and evidence required to demonstrate competency in this unit. A very long-winded subheading. We tend to shorten it and call it critical aspects. Now, against this heading, critical aspects, you'll see the evidence that must be gathered. So if you are going to deliver and assess this unit of competency, evidence of the dot points is absolutely essential for you to make a decision of competent or not yet competent. Another subheading under Evidence Guide is Context of and Specific Resources for Assessment. Again, we shorten this and you'll hear people call it Context of. Now, the dot points here, they explain how and where the evidence must be gathered. For example, it might be okay to use a simulated environment. In other units, they might demand that you actually assess in the workplace. Also look for the heading Range Statement. Now the range statement sets the scene or the context of the delivery and the assessment of this unit and how it plays out in the workplace. It's interesting to note, if you go back to the performance criteria, you might see some words or phrases or terms bolded and italicized. Any word that's bolded and italicized in the performance criteria will be explained in the range statement. The range statement is actually a really useful part of the unit of competency, and it's important that you become familiar with it. Right, you're probably feeling overwhelmed, frustrated, exhausted, and slightly annoyed with my voice. It's all quite normal. This is just an introductory movie. It's just dipping your toe in the water and learning a little bit about training packages. The purpose of this movie is to introduce you to some of these concepts. We will be going over all of them in class, and I'm just hoping that when we do that, you might have that aha moment and go, I remember that on the movie, or I looked at that, or I've already been into training.gov.au, so I've got a bit of a feel for it. If you've got any problems or questions that you would like to ask before I see you in class or before I see you again, please don't hesitate to send me an email. Thank you.